We've been focusing a lot on this mostly declarative approach to state management with RxJS and Signals, where we have data sources or actions represented by observables at the top of the flow. These observables are manually subscribed to, which serves as a reducer step to update a state signal using the current state and whatever value the observable just emitted. We then select our state from the state signal using computed selectors. We've also played around with adding in the connect utility from ng extension to remove some of the boilerplate of this approach. The approach remains fundamentally the same, but we don't need to worry about handling the manual subscribe ourselves. This approach uses the power of both RxJS and Signals where they are best suited, RxJS for data sources and events, and Signals for state. Another thing that I like about this approach is that it can be executed quite easily with no external libraries. You can see the underlying concepts at play without needing to add a ton of boilerplate yourself. This is great, especially for learning, but it could be made easier and better by adding in a state management utility. And perhaps more importantly, we can also help address one of the limitations of this approach, which is this declarative disconnect between the state signal and the sources that are updating it. When we look at the declaration of this state signal, we have no idea how its values are set. This approach is declarative before the state signal is set, and it is declarative again after the state signal is set, but it has this imperative gap which I wanted to get rid of if I could. So over the past few weeks, I've been collaborating with Chow in an attempt to take these same underlying concepts that we've been using, but make them as easy and boilerplate free as possible to implement. The result of this has been what is mostly just a single utility function called Signal Slice, and this is now available in ng extension. So here's how it works. Let's start with our original state management approach using RxJS and Signals. To set up our state initially with Signal Slice, we can just supply it with an initial state. And even without doing anything yet, we already have some benefits here, as Signal Slice will automatically create selectors for us that we can use to access our state. You can also add an additional selectors configuration if you also want to make some custom selectors available. This just uses a standard computed signal under the hood. Now, a key idea here in our existing approach is these sources. They are what drive change in the application. We can make a distinction here though. Some sources, like this checklist loaded source, emit automatically with no interaction required. It just loads data and emits when the data has loaded. We can just take these sorts of sources and supply them to the sources property in Signal Slice. We just map the sources to whatever state we want them to update, and whenever they emit, the state signal will be updated with those values. But then we also have these other kinds of sources, these actions, where we manually next them at some point. For example, when the user is trying to add a new checklist. For these types of sources, we will add them to the action sources config in Signal Slice. These are actions which can be triggered manually, and they return sources to update the state signal, just like a normal source. To create one of these action sources, we supply it with a function that takes in the current state signal and an action observable. This action observable will be triggered with the payload, if there is any payload, when the action is called. So to create our source from this action, we pipe onto this action observable and map it to the values we want to update in the state signal. Again, just like a normal source. To trigger this action, we can just call state.add and supply it with the checklist we are trying to add. So now we've refactored this code to use Signal Slice, and it is quite a bit nicer to set up and use. Less code, no constructor with manual subscribes, but perhaps most importantly, this is now more declarative. Rather than having this complete disconnect between the state signal and the sources updating it, we can now see up front in the state's declaration all the ways the state can be updated. There are more advanced features of Signal Slice that I've not covered here. You can check out the docs for a full list of features, but I will also do a more advanced video here soon. If you want to have a play around with it in your own apps, I'd love to hear any feedback you have, and I hope to catch you back here again for the next video.